Backseas Musical Podcast.
Hey, everybody, it's Bax, and welcome back to Baxi's Musical Podcast. My guest today is drummer, songwriter, author, educator, and the curator of the Post-Punk and Industrial Music Museum in Chicago, Illinois, Martin Atkins. In 1991, I bought a copy of the album Extremities, Dirt, and Various Repressed Emotions by the band Killing Joke. Now, I happen to love Killing Joke, but this was the first Killing Joke album that I actually bought with my own money. And I had known that their original drummer had left the band and they had hired somebody new. And if you know anything about Killing Joke, you know this is an incredibly intense band in which the drumming requires somebody who is absolutely ferocious. And the new drummer did not disappoint in the least. In fact, whoever that guy was a freaking beast. Well, as it turned out, that drummer would be Martin Atkins. Martin had been the drummer with John Lydon in Public Image Limited. Martin Atkins would also play with such industrial heavyweights like Ministry, Skinny Puppy, and later Nine Inch Nails. Martin has been everywhere. But Martin wasn't just a skilled and powerful drummer. Martin has had a career that has literally brought him through every phase of the music industry, through band management, producing, to owning his own record company, to becoming a professor of music business at Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, and literally everything else in between. This is one of the most intelligent and respected people in rock music. His latest project, even more fascinating, because Martin Atkins has created a museum, specifically a museum to honor some of the music that he helped create and inspire during the post-punk period. He also appropriately combined that foundational history with the advent of industrial music, which he was also instrumental in creating. It's a legitimate museum that celebrates not only the stuff from Martin's own personal collection, but donated items featuring bands like The Cure and Joy Division and hundreds more. As a fan of that stuff, I was not only thrilled to become a founding member of the Post-Punk and Industrial Music Museum, I was even more excited to speak to its founder, the amazing Martin Atkins, on Baxi's Musical Podcast. How you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks. Yeah. Like the T-shirt.
I was going to say, I wore this special for you.
Good deal.
I was online a while back, and a friend of mine had posted their founders package for the Post-Punk and Industrial Museum. And as soon as I found out that it came with a T-shirt, I thought, well, I got to get on this. So I'm delighted to be founder number 1098.
Oh, excellent.
So tell me about this. I mean, not only do I get the cool T-shirt, but I'm actually very excited about the idea of this of the museum. Tell me what made you start it.
Well, it's a bunch of things. It's partially my ridiculous collection, which goes back to I think when I was 19 or 20, I couldn't believe that I was in this band with Johnny Rotten and we were doing the John PiL show or going to Paris, So I kept a paper cup from the BBC. I kept my ticket from the Paris Metro, the backstage pass, the hand-typed itinerary, blah, 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 all of the stuff, not knowing that all of that stuff from Paris would become Paris au Printemps. That was my first gig with PiL. So I had my collection that then, 5 years with PiL, Killing Joke, Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, Pigface. Then you throw in the fact that I started Invisible Records. We put out 350 albums so far. So I would have materials from Genesis, P-Orage, Einstürzende Neubauten, Swans, all of these releases that we did. And then I took all of these bands and more on tour. And then the pandemic hits.
Right.
So I would be doing Zooms. I'll go, well, why don't I do a Zoom about my time in Killing Joke? And I pull out a piece of scenery as a background. So I'm starting to pull things out of boxes. And then instead of starting the Martin Atkins Museum of Martin Atkins, I which I'm sure some people would do something like that, I'm sure. But I said, well, how can I use this as a starting point that will be more interesting for me and for people who aren't totally into me, So then we announced the launch last April, and two ways for people to become a founder. One was to buy the founders pack, and thank you for doing that.
Of course.
And the other way was to suggest something that they would donate. And so the response has been, I mean, in every sense of the word, overwhelming. There's 10 packages over by my door right now. Some people, the donate option was intended for somebody who didn't have $125 to become a founder. But some people became founders and then sent a box of stuff and then sent another box of stuff. So some people became, well, one guy, Paulie, he stopped by with 30 t-shirts in 2 big bags after becoming a founder. And it's just like, well, hold on, there's something else going on here. This is more important to people than just having a place to put this. It really struck a chord with people.
The more I was reading about it, and obviously I wanted to research a little bit more, knowing I was going to talk to you, and then just being a fan of the music and of your work, all I could think of is it sounds like your house might have been this close to being on an episode of Hoarders, because it just sounded like there had to be so much stuff over so many years, and really fascinating stuff too. It's not just like you got a collection of of yogurt cups in the house. It's like this is real stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, you go back to the Mickey Mouse watch I bought at Disneyland in 1980. Like, all right, but then for the Flowers of Romance album with Public Image in '82, I heard all of these rhythms inside this watch. We put it on a floor tom-tom. Nick Launay, who did Kate Bush, Idols, and just did the music for Peaky Blinders on Netflix. He engineered this stuff, and so then I played drums to the sounds of this Mickey Mouse watch, and we've got that. We've got the signs from the dressing room door on American Bandstand. But then people have started to send me stuff. There's almost a Marilyn Manson wing. Cancelled at the moment. I'm not sure if he will continue to be cancelled, but people are sending skinny puppy stuff. I had some skinny puppy stuff because I worked on the Process album with them. But once people saw that there was an area that was puppy, people started sending more stuff. And it just becomes something else. It's a nice place to sit. I find it quite relaxing. We're doing a bunch of events this weekend. We're trying to do non-traditional museum stuff. So instead of, whoa, don't touch, those are the drums from the Head Like a Hole video and the Ministry tour. Yeah, go ahead, go play my drums. I haven't broken them in 30 years. I doubt that you can. We're doing a whiskey pancake pop-up brunch. We've done haircuts just because a bunch of people said to me, oh, be really careful. I'm like, yeah, we'll be really careful, but there's going to be hair all over the floor next week because we're doing haircuts. So I'm trying to, stumble my way through a post-punk approach to a museum,
I love this idea because to me, post-punk and even industrial music to a greater extent too. I mean, there are genres of music that have an enormous amount of fans, but it seems to be an underserved genre when it starts talking about the history of this music and where it fits in culture. And I'm of the age. I'm 56. I'm of the age where this is like the sweet spot of music I listen to from college on. And so it's I'm so excited about the fact that this is a place that exists in Chicago, which a city I've been through many times. I went to school up at Marquette in Milwaukee. I do know the city reasonably well, And to me, the idea of coming out and looking at this stuff and being and being a founder with a T-shirt, this is music that does need to really get a second look because it is a powerful music for a whole generation of people.
Well, and it isn't just the music. A lot. I mean, of course, that's important. Um, there's all of these visual elements from the Ministry Cage tour. So I've got pieces of the Cage. Then I have pieces of the Cage that a band called Test Department borrowed, stole, whatever, and turned into instruments on stage for their tour. So we've got those instruments that they made. Then all of this screen printed, these backdrops that we would do for different tours, uh, homemade T-shirts, hand-screened album covers, sandpaper album covers, all of these different things that you can look around and go, okay, it kind of gives you a handle on a creative path, a process to make things happen in a very DIY way, without in a punk way, not asking for permission,
Right.
just doing it. And so what I like about the museum is, I like a lot of things about it, but that we're doing it in a post-punk industrial way. It's not like we've received a grant from the city and here it is, because that none of us have ever received grants from anybody. So, which is not to say that we don't want to pursue that stuff in the future, but this didn't start because somebody gave us permission.
Right.
It started because it was just an idea that resonated with people.
I was hoping to get the PPIM catalog in the mail. I ordered that too because I want to see some of the stuff that was in there. But of the things that you've received so far, what was the biggest surprise for you personally?
I mean, there's been quite a few. There's some things that are surprising, and jarring is not the right word, but so for instance, somebody brought the skull from a Ministry mic stand from 1993, and it's in a lot of photographs, and that was like, okay, that's interesting. But then somebody sent me, we have the 2-inch tape of Burning Inside, the multi-track tape from Burning Inside, and that's cool. And like, what on earth are we doing with this? But we also have from 89 a reel of 2-inch tape, and it just says Martin and Bill, that's myself and Bill Rieflin, the two of us who did the Cage tour, unfinished drum track. Well, so Bill Rieflin is no longer with us, so now I have to, you can't just play these old tapes, you have to bake them in an oven professionally. So we have to do that, then pull the audio off, and then I get to sit in a room and listen to me. I don't know what the song is. Some things, if you say, oh, it's another version of this, I would know what it is. I have no recollection of this happening.
Really?
So I'm kind of, that's going to be strange, and hopefully it will be awesome, but so things like that. Somebody just sent me last week 16 copies of Alternative Press magazine that Jason Pettigrew, the senior editor of Alternative Press from back in the day, was like, "What? I don't even have these. How are you getting this stuff?" A signed burnt Bible from a Manson show, all kinds of T-shirts. There's a band called Hilt, HILT, which is a predecessor to Skinny Puppy. I didn't know this. I learned this stuff. Vancouver. And somebody sent me a T-shirt. I'm like, oh, okay, great. And I look it up. There are only 6 of these known to exist. Okay, but you also get a feel for these different kind of currencies, the different ways that people remember. Some people it's buttons, some people it's tour passes, some people it's T-shirts, some people it's posters, and or vinyl albums or whatever. And people just keep sending us this stuff.
Remarkable. I've been listening to your music, to your work for a long, long time, and in 1990 is when I started to get into Killing Joke, and
Okay.
and the first album I bought was Extremities, Dirt, and Various Repressed Emotions, and I remember Yeah, and I had heard Killing Joke songs before then, but that was the first album that I actually went out and bought. And I remember listening to it and going, Jesus, who the hell is drumming on this record? Thinking, oh my God, who's ever doing this is a freaking beast. You know, that is a band to me that was a great comeback record for them, and it showed a band of such enormous power and urgency. That's like one of the things I've always loved about Killing Joke. I know you only played on that one album, but you did manage them for a while. Tell me a little bit about that was like to work with Killing Joke.
Well, and thank you for all of that. Okay. So I had 5 years. I had 5 years in public image, and worked. One of the last things I did with PiL was "This Is Not a Love Song," which is the biggest selling single they've ever had. And so, and then I was so unhappy. Um, House in LA with a swimming pool. I'm like, if this is it, and for a kid from the north of England, if a house in LA and a hit single isn't it, then you need to be a welder, you know.
Right.
Um, but so, and I gave up for a while, and then Geordie from Killing Joke got my number and called me and said, "Come to England. We want you to join Killing Joke." And so I'm like, "All right, Change, Love Like Blood." I saw Killing Joke, in 1979. I love Killing Joke, and 80s, Kings and Queens, Nighttime, yeah. And then the 2 days before I got on the plane, my first wife said to me, she used to be at WMSE radio in Milwaukee.
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
And she worked at Atomic Records, and she was a fixture there. And she said, before you get on the plane, I'm like, change, da, 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 you should listen to the last album. Like, oh, I haven't heard of this album. So I put on Outside the Gate, and I nearly didn't get on the plane.
Yeah.
I'm like, what happened? And I just found out in doing my coronavirus Zooms, as I'm doing more and more research and adding a slide every time I do it, I found out that album was why Paul Raven quit. Paul Ferguson quit, asked to have his name taken off. So my time in Killing Joke was almost like how do I describe? It was almost like I had to put on the force field, and it became my job to get them back to where I loved them.
Yeah.
But then along the way, they didn't do that much work, right? So, and I wanted to let's go and do 100 shows, and there was these periods of downtime. I'm like, what? Let's tour America, and we did some American dates, and then bumped into Al Jorgensen, and Al said to me, "Come, you should come and do this tour with us." I'm like, okay. So I was in Killing Joke when I toured with Ministry, and that Ministry album, that experience, took my drumming to another level. So like somebody plays Burning Inside, and the beat to Burning Inside, just a constant drum roll, and I tune my drums very loosely. So it isn't like you hit the drum and the stick bounces back. It just goes do, do, So after playing all of those songs for 6 weeks and seeing Ministry go up the charts, seeing the response from the crowd, I'm like, okay, I took on the job of guiding, insisting that the lyrics were up to par and addressed people that were coming to our shows instead of some global elite. There's a song on there called Age of Greed.
Yep.
And I mean, this is at the studio, this is at the museum. So I knew that I had arguments with Jazz about the lyrics. And I'm like, what is this? What is this song you're singing? And part of the song was about first class travel. It's not really worth it, And I'm like, who is this song for, Jazz? Killing Joke fans in England are hitchhiking to shows because they love the band and they have no money. I can't imagine these people down the front agreeing with you. First, you're right, first class travel. Although Turkish Air is really good value in business class. What is this effing song about, man? And so there are these lyric sheets at the museum, and I can see my handwriting and Geordie's handwriting, And then I remember being in the studio and calling up Chicago Track Studio, where Ministry recorded here in Chicago, and saying, I remember hearing this this advert for meat, like, when was the last time you had a tender, juicy steak? And I had Jessica Philines, who was an assistant at the studio, record the ad off the TV and send it to me in England. So that Extremities album, I was the beneficiary of 6 weeks of insane drumming and 6 weeks of rehearsal before that. And I think Killing Joke was the beneficiary of somebody within the band who wasn't gonna let, I don't know how this is gonna sound, let them get away with just keyboard masturbation that was on outside the gate. Sometimes it got really, it was almost a force of will, and sometimes it got really difficult. But honestly, after that album, we had some fantastic shows and some great tours, but I wanted to do 300 shows a year. I started Pigface. So I was in Killing Joke when I toured with Ministry. Halfway through the Ministry tour, I started Pigface. And then I went and did the Extremities album with Killing Joke. So there's this period of insane creativity. But once we toured with Pigface, and there's Ogre, there's Chris Connolly, Andrew Weiss from the Rollins Band, there's all of these people, I saw a different way that things could be. And I didn't want to spend more time with Killing Joke arguing with everybody all the time.
My sense of being a fan of theirs, and I watched the documentary that came out a couple of years ago, and you were in it. It does sound like this is not really the easiest band to be in. this has to be a lot of, not just a lot of work physically, but just a lot of work, maybe more so emotionally and intellectually than maybe anything else.
Yeah, I mean, jazz is intense, and so I mean, I've been around John and Al Jorgensen and Trent and everybody else, Genesis P. Orridge, and you want people in bands to be intense and difficult and not easy to deal with, because that's what makes the thing interesting to watch. But yeah, I mean, Geordie is a phenomenon. I love Geordie's guitar playing. Lucky enough to be in a band with Keith Levine at his height. Geordie is one of my absolute stunning guitar players, favorite guitar players. Paul Raven, who replaced Youth, and now Youth, of course, because Paul Raven passed, now Youth is back with them. I get along great with Youth. And we all get along okay now, but it was very difficult for a while because I quit Killing Joke, and I take pride in what I did while I was with them. Things were very, very difficult. There was no money. And I'll tell my students, I'm like, I had to start managing the band for the band to exist because I wanted to play drums in them, And so I mean, during recording of Extremities, we got a phone call from Poland. We want you to do this show for it's £15,000 to play a stadium in Warsaw. And they're like, well, we can't do it. We're making an album. I'm like, oh, we kind of need to do it, And then Roger Taylor from Queen had some kind of benefit in Geneva, Switzerland. £10,000, And I'm like, we got guys, we got to do this, So I got to work, and I'm like, we could send our equipment to Poland because, and I made sure, Jazz had done all of his OBX overdubs. I did the drums for Extremities in 11 hours.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It was, I mean, we rehearsed for 6 weeks, but so yeah,
Yeah,
um,
that's intense.
we were really prepared. So I didn't need the drums, and of course, if something came up like, oh my God, we've got to overdub the cowbell, we would have rented one. So I'm like, look, guys, we can mix, send the equipment to Poland, you know, we can fly to Poland, do that show, fly back. Then the equipment truck and our crew can drive to Geneva. Then we're back in the studio for 4 days. We can fly to Geneva. And I think I had like a listening session at the hotel and whatever, and made it so that we could juggle these things and there would be some money to to keep things moving.
But Killing Joke is one of those bands that has a tendency and a long history of self-sabotage, which is unfortunate because, I mean, like right now with all four original members, the band sounds fantastic. The last couple of albums they've made.
Yeah, and my goodness, most of the bands all of the bands I've been in are still playing. PiL still exists in a kind of a different form than it used to in the 80s, where anything could happen. Sometimes a song was 5 minutes long, sometimes it was 9 minutes long, to allow for improvisation musically or visually. If John was dragged into the crowd or there were riot police on stage or whatever was going to go on, everything was flexible. Now I think it's it's almost like a PiL cover band.
Yeah.
But I love going to see Killing Joke, and as I said, we all get along okay now. There's a little bit of like, drummers don't leave singers bands, but I think that didn't help my relationship with Lydon, but it's something that we've kind of gotten over with Killing Joke.
Yeah.
So it's great to go and see them. Yeah.
I want to ask you about Public Image because a couple weeks ago I did an interview with Jaw Wobble, and he was great, and we'd spent a lot of time talking about those early records, especially Metal Box.
Mm-hmm.
He's done a dub version of it,
Yeah.
which sounds really
Yeah.
cool. I mean, PiL to me is like one of those bands where, in its entirety, may have been as influential or maybe even more so influential than the Sex Pistols were, depending on what direction you're following. I mean, I know you only played like the one song on Metal Box, but I was just listening to Flowers of Romance the other day, which I hadn't heard in a long, long time. I just listened to the drums on it. And, I think for any drummer, which I am one, but not a very good one. I'm a long ways away from Martin Atkins, I can tell you that. But just from for any drummer, I think that's an essential listen, because it just shows you that it's not that there's a certain creativity that you can use to approach drums. And in that case, it was like, very different from anything you've ever heard before, much like the first two PiL albums. To me, that fits, even though it is probably not the most popular of that catalog. To me, it's a really important one. Yeah, I mean, I can just hear the creativity that's pouring out of you guys at that time. It's a really cool record.
Thank you.
So, I mean, tell me about that experience, because, obviously this is a band that could have gone in any number of directions. Very strong personalities. Lydon is as in very much the way that Jazz Coleman is a strong personality, also came with pretty significant challenges too. Tell me about that experience of officially joining that band.
Well, so I wasn't actually in the band when I did Flowers. I joined after Metal Box. We did John Peel, Old Grey Whistle Test, Paris, the American tour, and then Keith fired me. And then they asked me to come and do some work. They called me a session drummer at the time, which is bullshit, because you would pay a session drummer. In fact, some journalist called me up like a year ago and said, "What? People said you were a session drummer, but you don't give session musicians writing credits." And I co-wrote a bunch of that stuff. So it was a crazy time. We were in Studio 2 at the Townhouse in London, which is where Phil Collins recorded In the Air Tonight. So
Yep.
you're in one of the best sounding drum rooms in the world. Nick Launay was 10 weeks into his career, which is still going. He just did Idols, Peaky Blinders, Kate Bush, etc. Nick Cave, and it was me and him. So one of the things that used to really piss me off is, somebody would ask Keith Levine, "Tell me about Flowers," and he would tell them about Flowers. He kind of wasn't there. He was face down on the carpet, involved in whatever drugs he was involved with at the time. And it started with me and Nick. We crafted 6 or 7 songs. There's a couple that haven't been released, which I have, fully formed with vocals and keyboards and everything. And so we would just layer these songs with my Mickey Mouse watch and a boom, 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 right? And then, I bought this trumpet in Paris that when you blow in the trumpet, it flips a diaphragm, which starts a mini record player, which plays these 2-inch records of someone playing trumpet. So we reversed that, and then set off a fire extinguisher at the start of Under the House and used aerosol spray to replace the hi-hat. Just crazy experimentation. And the miraculous thing about that album, I think, was that these were kind of audio experiments, rhythm experiments, soundscapes, whatever you want to, and John was always around. Like sometimes you'd be in a studio for 8 hours and there was a couch in front of the console, 2 steps down. And you just you'd be there and he'd just appear because he'd been there the whole time, or he'd be outside the studio, but you could hear stuff, So we do these pieces and John would just come in and sing Under the House, which in the same kind of way that I think Maynard might do with Tool. Whereas here's this thing, or I heard that Bowie did this as well. They would make this music and they go, okay, hit verse, and then the middle 8, then the chorus, and the boom, boom, boom. And Bowie would come in and sing a chorus across the middle 8 and the instrumental, just, and that's what John would do. He would sing a fully formed song over the top of what we were doing, sometimes in one take. And so when John pretends he has a strategy, what was the plan? People might imagine, John's a strong individual. It's all right, Martin, I'm thinking like a diddler, 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 like a chieftain's Baran rhythm, but across the drums. Nick, do a harmonizer pattern with a Mickey Mouse watch. Who's got a backwards trumpet? Just, that didn't happen. It was just creativity gone mad. And then we started, I'd go in and drink some Perrier, and we record the glugging sounds of me drinking Perrier. We record that at 15 inches a second, play it back at 1 3/4, and it sounded like dinosaurs coming out of a swamp. And then I'd play a beat to that, And so I did my work on Flowers, was uncredited on the track, the title track, Flowers of Romance, which we just worked that out about 5 years ago. John's management sent me a letter saying, yeah, that is you playing drums. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Then that's a co-write because I played drums to blank tape.
Right.
So that's a co-write. And so we still need to sort more of that out. But then I jumped on a plane and came to America to tour with my band, Brian Brain, which was this crazy, violent 3-piece punk situation with my drums on tape. And then it was maybe 6 months after that, John and Keith moved to New York City. And I just said, screw this, I'll move to New York as well, because people were. And then they came down to a show I had at the Mud Club and asked me to rejoin the band. And we started working on This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get.
Yeah.
But I have massive respect for John. We don't get along very well these days. And I can understand how it's John has a bunch of employees that work with him. So I have never been an employee of John's, and I would tell him exactly, you know, um, and that I understand that that's not always easy or desirable to be around. I get it. I seek that out with Pigface because I think it makes for a very interesting result.
It would seem that after working with John and with Keith Levine and Jazz Coleman, that Al Jorgensen must have been a piece of cake to you.
Well, it was it felt like first day of school because I mean I've known Wobble for a long time. When I was working on Wobble's Betrayal album, we were early for a session. Killing Joke were late. I was dating Beth Ann Peters, who was in Delta 5. She knew Youth. So all of these people, I'd had some kind of connection with in one way or another. Ministry, as Olga from Skinny Puppy, I'm like, all right, Chris Connolly from the Feeney Tribe. I didn't know anybody. So, but certainly all of that prior experience made it like easier to deal with. But I just want to mention before we go on to Ministry that I loved working with Wobble, and we still get along pretty well. He decided to leave the band before we came to America, which is heartbreaking for even. I mean, he quit afterwards, but it was heartbreaking for me to find out that all of the New York City, Detroit, Chicago. We went to see the Crusaders in Detroit, and that experience he knew the whole time he was leaving, and me, I'm just like this wide-eyed kid, like America. Here we are, But I love Wobble, and we later did the Damage Manual together. But yeah, Ministry. That time of Ministry, industrial music was exploding. It was new. And I remember we were rehearsing in Evanston at this theater, and Patty Jorgensen, who was Al's wife at the time, would come running down the aisle of the theater with the latest charts from Rockpool magazine. And it's kind of like a Xeroxed magazine almost. And surprised as anybody that Mind is a Terrible Thing was just going up and up and up the charts. And so it was like my experience with punk, I think, gave me the ability to see, like, hold on a minute, this genre is in its moment, and I as I describe it, we had a show in Denver followed by 2 nights off, and that as we came into the dressing room before the encore of the first show in Denver, the promoter just came in the room and said, $10,000 if you announce that you're playing tomorrow. And I just thought, well, this is ridiculous, like 200, who's going to, 200 people will show up, but like, well, yeah, okay, and that show sold out. And he did the same thing the next night. We ended up doing 3 sold out shows. And I remember saying to Al, I knocked on his hotel room door in Denver, and I said, I know that you've got like 6 weeks of my time, and then I'm back into Killing Joke, but I'll call them now. You want to just like, do you just want to keep this going? And he's like, oh, let me think about that. But within 2 weeks, I didn't want to have anything to. I mean, that tour really descended into the pits of all kinds of ugly depravity.
Yeah.
And so I was happy to jump back into Killing Joke, having started Pigface, and recorded the beginnings of Pigface in the 2 days after the tour ended, to get on a plane and go and do Killing Joke. Yeah.
I remember being in school, you talk about that period where, industrial music starts to explode. So, I was in school from, like 84 to 88, 89. That's when things really started to really get moving. Ministry after their first album, but, the Front 242s and Fetus and Revolting Cocks and all those bands that were just, they were really starting to change the landscape. It's almost as if like a lot of the kids that were listening to post-punk got bored with it because it started to soften up and get quieter and quieter and more depressing. And then all of a sudden it's like they were just craving for something that was noisy and aggressive and angry again. I think that was probably the reason why it became so popular for that period of time.
And machinery. So Big Black, Steve Albini, that was drum machine driven.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of sampling and looping and hard repetitive beats and just a different feeling. Yeah, and man, yeah, Revolting Cocks, Wax Tracks, but Big Black were on Touch and Go Records, Jesus Lizard, then all the stuff just coming out of this crazy soup. It was wild. It was wild.
It was wild, and I remember you mentioned Atomic Records. I remember
Uh-huh.
a roommate of mine worked there, and
Okay.
I remember he came home one day to the apartment, and he had a Big Black's Headache EP,
Yeah.
and said, "Hey, take a look at this album cover." I'm like, "What the hell is that?"
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they would produce so many great records, and Steve Albini became a great producer himself. It's almost as if that there there's a lot of you're really amazing creative talent that went into industrial music, and I think you still feel a lot of that influence today in the way people make music, especially now with a lot more with people doing a lot more home recording now. I mean, it just seems like that was a natural progression to almost the point where you don't really need instruments to make it happen.
Right. And it's a couple of industrial drummers, I think, who created the technology that's the touchscreen for the iPhone today. They were just trying to make easier programmable beats, you know. And and by the way, I have Albini's 8-track and his quarter-inch machine. Those tape machines are in the museum. They're in my working studio downstairs. We recorded. Me and Jody recorded 6 of the demos for Extremities at Albini's studio in Chicago. So I have those tapes and the machine that they were recorded on. So
Yeah, the rest of your career, I mean, it's very diverse. I mean, it's not just about recording music and making music, but you've done everything from songwriting and merchandising to publishing, and then all of a sudden you get into education and teaching about the business of music. Right now, I still believe you're teaching it at Millikan
yeah, Millikan University.
in
Yeah,
Decatur. Yeah,
yeah.
tell me about how you got into teaching.
Well, by accident. Um, we were putting together these crazy tours, 2 buses, 5 bands, 20,000 promotional CDs, 80 to 100,000 promotional postcards, maybe 10 different designs with different partners and sponsors. And I heard about interns, that you could get interns and they would help, and in return you'd stop and show them stuff and they get a bit of an education. And so I went up to Columbia College Chicago and did a little bit of a presentation. This is what we're doing, this is what I've done, blah blah blah. And somebody actually said to me, Phyllis, I've forgotten her last name, when could you start? And I said, if you've got students, I can put them in my car now. I'm like 2 miles down the street, and I could start taking interns. And they're like, no, when could you start teaching? And I actually said, teaching what? Like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, teaching touring, because this is obviously your world. And I'm like, I've been in a band since I was 11 or 12, drumming since I was 9, and touring all my life. And I'm like, honestly, I thought the craziest thing I could do was say yes. So I remember I asked, like, well, when is the first class? Thinking I'd have like 6 months to prepare. And they're like, well, it's this Saturday. So I mean, in retrospect, obviously somebody had, like, let them down. So I
Right.
was like, I'm like, well, and how long is the class? Like thinking it would be like an hour. It's 7 hours on a Saturday. And I'm just like, and I just thought, and I said to them, look, if I can, in the same way that I logistically worked out Kill and Joke Extremities album with a break to play Poland and Geneva, I'm like, well, I'm in the middle of the beginning of a tour. And I looked at the schedule. I'm like, if I can replace the last 2 weeks with a practicum experience at the Metro with Pigface, then we've got a deal. And so I had 7 students come to the Metro at load in for Pigface. I had them smell the road crew, like, and I actually set them up in the balcony with their own bar tab, but then they came into the office for settlement with Joe Shanahan. And we got through the first one. And I saw there wasn't a book. So I wrote Tour Smart for that class. And then that turned into speaking opportunities around the world, which was, I wasn't a public speaker, but I became one. That was an evolution and finding my feet doing that, but it was my punk background and my experience with all those bands of reinventing things and, not giving up and just pushing that enabled me to take that on. And then I went on to develop the whole program at Madison Media Institute and then SAE Chicago. And now I'm down at Millikan. Yeah.
You wrote quite extensively about the music business, and obviously, since you were young, it's a different world now for musicians, and a totally different kind of business model these days. It almost seems as though there's barely a business model in some regards. Where do you see things, today, and do you see any room for optimism with the music business right now?
Oh yeah, I mean, so financially, music business revenues are growing, but that's going to like 5 people. It's people like Simon Cowell who've annexed a bunch of publishing rights. There's a guy, I've forgotten his name. He's in England, and he's a publisher and a business person. He's making more money from songs than every songwriter in England combined.
Hmm.
So there's some crappy stuff going on, but it's always been, if there's a common thread, you've always been up against it. You're always trying to differentiate you from other people, and knowledge is power. Once I tell my students, hey, 70,000 songs were uploaded to Spotify yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so if your pitch to me is like, you've written a great song, I'm like, fuck off. I assume 10,000 out of the 70,000 are pretty good, So if that's your plan, you're screwed before you start. But if you make here's a single in a scratch and sniff Blueberry single sleeve, here's the download, but you get attention to the streams by having an object. I'll tell people, put a QR code on the side of a fish. Then you get the animal rights people. This is inhumane. Some of the scales have been destroyed. But the fight and the problem is still the same as it's always been. And so you're working to make connections with people. You're working to overcome your own insecurities about your abilities and shyness and or whatever else. But it's possible to make this work in a way that it didn't used to be, with things like Patreon, Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and there's a bunch of new little. Coffee is a new platform, which is the great thing about teaching this stuff, because one of my students just told me about Coffee, or this new platform to fund things.
Mm-hmm.
So the problems are the same, I think. And I think one of the main problems being people who are starting out, they're trying to succeed in the music business as it was in 1980. And it's like, no, you need 10 skills. Your ability to play bass isn't as important as you think it is. You can't be terrible at the bass, but you don't need to be amazing. You need to be pretty decent at 10 different things, and that includes screen printing, social media, driving a vehicle, geography, strategy,
Hmm.
woodworking, maybe. I'm looking for someone to work in my studio that can also be a barista, because Dark Matter Coffee gave me a $6,000 espresso machine. So that's part of the job description for a potential engineer in my studio. So that's how the world is now. What are the 5 things that you bring to the table? And I think that making your way in the music business, it's a very powerful way to get the skills to succeed in any other business.
And that's good advice for anything. I mean, to have that kind of diversity in your skill set, or to work on things to get yourself prepared for a career in really any occupation.
Well, I think we've all developed this attitude, because Martin King from Test Department is coming in to talk at the museum tomorrow. And I remember there was a Test Department tour. I don't know where we were, Memphis or somewhere, Nashville. And we actually thought the venue had been broken into and trashed. But the promoter, who wasn't really a promoter, had just left and forgotten to lock the door. And so the sound system wasn't working very well. So our sound guy kind of rewired the sound system to make the best out of it. Everybody in the band kind of swept up, because if the show didn't happen, or if it happened badly, we wouldn't have sold as many T-shirts. Maybe some people would have not shown up, or shown up and gone, well, screw this. It looks like the club's been in a tornado. And so you just get used to, oh, the show's being canceled. Well, we'll go 200 miles. We'll book a show with 1 day's notice at this other place. You develop the skill set that increases your chances of succeeding or surviving and getting across to the other side of the raging river. And that gives you a level of confidence that makes you attractive to any employer in any field.
I can't wait to the next time I'm in Chicago, because there's a field trip waiting, and I can't wait to take a look around. And if I can get to play your drums badly, mind you, that'd be a real thrill.
Of course. When you have a trip, make sure you let me know. And we're appointment only. But
Okay.
anybody coming in from out of state, I always make an effort to we're doing something this afternoon. We're doing something. Yeah.
Well, listen, I'll start reading up on how to operate your coffee machine, and maybe I can help intern that way.
There we go.
Okay.
Good deal.
Martin, it's
Good deal.
it's great to talk to you. Real pleasure. I've been a big fan for a long, long time. So thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to talk to you.
Take care, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
The Post-Punk and Industrial Music Museum is now open in Chicago. You can find out more on Martin's website and on Facebook. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like it, share it, tell all your friends about it. You can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. And thanks again for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.